I wanted to go about building a simple but accurate strip ripping jig, because I build a lot of things that have lattice work where you need consistent widths in strips of wood. Generally I use 1/8" strips because my saw kerf is 1/8 of an inch, and you can get half laps to join, and I do a lot of lattice work like this, and so consistently wide strips are important. And so what I thought I would do is build a quick, simple jig. I've seen them done where the strip is against the rip fence and you just use some kind of a wide push stick, but I've also seen them done with bearings on the blade side of the piece of wood. And I have a whole bunch of these slot cutting router bits that have removable bearings, and I thought, well, is there a way I can use one of these, use the shaft of the router bit as some kind of a capstan or a trunnion to run that bearing on. So I fiddled around with some of these bits that I had, and then I went to my favorite hardware store, and sure enough, in the bins you can buy bearings that are very much like the router bearings, and these little steel shafts that fit them exactly. And yes, at my hardware store I found both of these, any size bearing almost you could think of, and a whole bunch of sizes of these things. So what I thought I would do is just take a piece of wood and cut a slot in the end of it that would have clearance for the bearing to turn, have enough support to support the shaft. And so I just very crudely marked out the width of the slot that I was going to need to have plenty of clearance for the bearing. And then I marked out the depth of the slot so that I knew the bearing would be able to turn freely inside of the slot, and simply marked that on a piece of a little bit bigger than 5/4 wood. I used my tenon jig to hold the wood upright over my table saw, and just made a series of passes with my blade, just continually adjusting the location of those cuts until I got the groove width that I wanted. None of this was scientific, none of this was ultra accurate. All it was just a quick way to cut a groove. You'll see I made this thing quickly without trying to even clean up the tear out. Maybe later I'll sand it and round it and make it a little bit nicer, but for right now I was just making something I could clamp down to the table at a fixed distance from the left-hand side of the blade so that I could rip a bunch of consistent strips, something I haven't been able to do up until this time. The little shaft and the hole in the bearing was 5/16 of an inch, and I had a drill bit that was 5/16. It fit really nice and tight where it just snugly pounded into the hole. I didn't have to use glue or anything like that. You'll see here I just tap it together, and the shaft fit the hole super tight, fits the bearing super tight. There's no play whatsoever. The bearing turns very freely. Again, super quick, super simple, but shockingly easy to use and nice and accurate. So once I had this little freely spinning bearing in the end of a piece of wood, I go over to my table saw, and using these quick clamps that I built, I just clamp it to the table. It's extremely firm. I set my saw fence so that the board is up against the bearing, and the bearing is the consistent width away from the left-hand side of the blade, and then I just push it through. What the bearing allows is a tight fit, yet ease of movement along the fence line, so that you get a pretty consistent width in each strip. Tightening the fence up against the bearing is a little tricky, but I think once you get sort of the feel of it, just how it feels to tap that up against that bearing, you can see I'm able to run these off pretty quickly. And all of them were a consistent width. You can see they lay nice and flat. And so this is my super quick, super simple strip ripping jig using no more than some scrap wood and a bearing and shaft I bought at the hardware store. I want to thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And thanks again for watching.